day 581 of the Trump administration. And just tonight, a short time ago, in fact, new legal troubles potentially for the president on a new front. We'll let the New York Times tell it, quote, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is considering pursuing criminal charges against the Trump Organization and two senior company officials in connection with Michael Cohen's hush money payment to an adult film actress. According to two officials with knowledge of the matter, a state investigation would center on how the company accounted for its reimbursements to Mr. Cohen for the $130,000 he paid to the actress Stephanie Clifford, who has said she had an affair with President Trump, close quote. Mostly along those same lines, a big story today had to do with a longtime friend of the president who has apparently turned on him. The Wall Street Journal broke the news that the publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, has been granted immunity by federal prosecutors for providing information about Michael Cohen. A person familiar with the matter has confirmed the report to NBC News. Make no mistake, this is a big development. As one Trump friend told Vanity Fair, holy expletive, I thought Pecker would be the last one to turn. Pecker has known Trump for decades. He helped that catch and kill negative stories about him. According to Michael Cohen, Pecker's company paid Karen McDougal exclusive rights for her account of an affair with Donald Trump and never published it. Trump has denied her account, for the record. This week, Michael Cohen admitted in court that he was directed by Trump to coordinate payments to McDougal as well as Stormy Daniels, a.k.a. her real name, Stephanie Clifford, to keep negative information from influencing the 2016 election. Also tonight, the AP reports that according to 5 sources, the National Enquirer, quote, kept a safe containing documents on hush money payments and other damaging stories it killed as part of its cozy relationship with Donald Trump leading up to the 2016 presidential election. According to the AP, fearful that the documents might be used against American media, Pecker and the company's chief content officer, Dylan Howard, removed them from the safe in the weeks before Trump's inauguration, according to one person directly familiar with the events. More on all of this later. The president has been telling his side of the story concerning the two Cohen-related payments. Here's how he explained them to Fox News.
Did you direct him to make these payments?
He made the deal. He made the deals. And by the way, he pled to 2 counts that aren't a crime, which nobody understands. I watched a number of shows. Sometimes you get some pretty good information by watching shows. Those 2 counts aren't even a crime. They weren't campaign financed. Later on, I knew. Later on, they didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me.
Remember, we've heard the president on audio tape talk about one of the payments, and with that answer there, the president could just have admitted to possibly violating another campaign finance law, because if that money came from him, Trump would have had to report it as a campaign expenditure, something he did not do. The president also took issue with Cohen's guilty plea and suggested that cooperating with authorities in any form should be against the law.
If you're saying the payments, if they're not illegal, then why would he use that information for a plea deal?
Because he makes a better deal when he uses me. This whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping. For 30, 40 years, I've been watching flippers. Everything's wonderful, and then they get 10 years in jail, and they flip on whoever the next highest one is, or as high as you can go. It almost ought to be outlawed. If you can say something bad about Donald Trump and you'll go down to 2 years or 3 years, which is the deal he made, in all fairness to him, most people are going to do that. And I've seen it many times. I've had many friends involved in this stuff. It's called flipping, and it almost ought to be illegal.
Also tonight, there are reports the president has considered a possible pardon for Paul Manafort. But to use plain English here, there are as many conflicting reports as there are a number of media interviews people conducted today with Rudolph Giuliani, who, as fate would have it, is in Scotland playing golf at a Trump golf course. The Washington Post says Giuliani told the paper the president asked his legal team about pardoning Manafort several weeks ago, and that they advised him to wait till after the Mueller investigation was over. Giuliani has also spoken to the New York Times, telling the paper that similar discussions about a pardon were initiated by the lawyers and not by the president. Giuliani spoke to NBC News as well, and he told us the president never specifically sought his lawyer's advice several weeks ago on whether to pardon Manafort, and that they talked about, quote, pardons in general. Tonight, the White House denies that a pardon is being discussed and that no decision has been made. Meanwhile, as the president grapples with his legal challenges and the investigations of his associates, he is taking aim once again at his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who has been one of his most loyal lieutenants in this administration. Coming up, you'll hear the president's latest complaints about the job that Sessions is doing. But first, here now is how Trump describes his own job performance.
What grade do you give yourself so far?
So I give myself an A+. I don't think any president has ever done what I've done in this short. We haven't even been 2 years. I would honestly give myself an A+, and so would many other people.
On that note, let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Thursday night. Robert Costa, national political reporter for The Washington Post and moderator of the A+ Washington Week on PBS. Jill Colvin, White House reporter for the Associated Press. Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI assistant director for counterintelligence, who in the past has worked for, among others, Robert Mueller. And Elie Honig is back with us, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Also happens to be former assistant attorney general for the state of New Jersey. Welcome to you all. Frank, because of your near unique resume, I'd like to begin with you. First of all, what should people think about this New York Times story tonight? Manhattan DA eyeing potential charges against Trump Organization and 2 senior execs.
This is a very interesting development, and it's interesting for 3 reasons. First, remember, the president cannot pardon someone, especially his own organization, for state or local crimes. Secondly, this is showing that there's increasing pain being brought to anyone associated with this president. And when you bring pain to associates of the president, you increase the likelihood that people cooperate as they assess that cost-benefit analysis. And third, Brian, while the U.S. Department of Justice may well have a legal memo in their files discouraging the indictment of a sitting president, there's no such memo in the Manhattan DA's office or in the state attorney general's office in New York.
Frank, when I heard the president's words today, I thought of all of you, all of the former feds we have affiliated who have become friends of this broadcast and appear with us often. He is supposed to be the protector and upholder of the rule of law, and there he was today talking about so-called flipping, coming out against cooperating with government prosecutors.
It's becoming increasingly clear, Brian, that this president never truly had long-term or national interest at heart. It's all about his self-interest. And what's ironic, increasingly ironic, is that a man who is driven entirely by his self-interest is being done in by cooperators who are operating on the same premise. They're looking out for themselves. And so he's being burned by people who operate by the same philosophy he does.
Elie Honig, you've been justifiably so proud watching these past few days the attorneys at your former jurisdiction, Southern District of New York, comport themselves and carry out what it is they carried out. What did you make of hearing the president's words today about cooperating with the government?
I was stunned, and I think Frank hit the nail on the head. It's all about the president's self-interest. Who are the people who truly fear and despise cooperating witnesses? They are the heads of major criminal organizations, drug traffickers, mob bosses, corrupt CEOs, corrupt politicians. The United States Department of Justice has made some of the most consequential cases in its history relying in part on cooperating witnesses. Terrorist attacks, massive financial frauds. In fact, this president says he's going to be the one who's going to bring down MS-13 and street gangs. I'll tell you what, without cooperating witnesses, he's never going to touch the real leaders of those organizations.
Jill, talk about your news organizations reporting on this safe, apparently inside the headquarters there at the National Enquirer.
Yeah, my colleague Jeff Horowitz, who has really been covering the AMI story for, I feel like, over a year at this point, maybe longer, talked to former AMI employees. A lot of these folks are under
AMI, American Media International?
Exactly. It's the company that owns the National Enquirer.
Sorry,
a lot of
go
these
ahead.
folks are under, confidentiality agreements. But what they told Jeff was that there was actually a safe that was in the offices there that was used to store all of the documents that had to do with the various hush fund payments, documents related to the Trump hush money settlements, but also related to other celebrities. You know, the way that the National Enquirer appears to have worked is they had this catch and kill policy, whereby they would pay people for their stories in an effort to prevent them from ever being published. It was something that really frustrated writers who worked there, because you get a big scoop and then you've got your bosses telling you, no, this can never get out there, this can never be published. And what the Cohen court filings have revealed and these employees have revealed is this pattern of working with people, but especially Trump, in this relationship that Cohen had with this organization, kind of actively using them to try to find out whether there are any stories brewing out there and then sending them after to kill them.
Jill, did that include stories against opponents? Did that include commissioning stories against people like Hillary Clinton? I know we have a montage of some of their covers in the past.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really interesting. So as early as 2010, employees said that Cohen and the National Enquirer were in conversations. It was as early as 2010 that the National Enquirer was running stories, kind of boosting the president's presidential ambitions, linking to a website that Cohen had helped set up to boost the president's name recognition. And there was a series of stories, if you go back throughout the election, in which the National Enquirer wrote no negative stories about President Trump and had story after story that was deeply negative, not only to Hillary Clinton, but you'll remember their Ted Cruz coverage, some really ridiculous allegations that the president then used on the campaign trail to try to discredit Ted Cruz. And you sort of see this pattern. Of this news organization. I use the term news organization very loosely. This organization, seemingly working on behalf of Trump's campaign, and I imagine a lot more will be coming out.
Bob Costa, you had the president today seemingly divorced from his role as the head of a law-abiding society. You've always been a very good West Wing whisperer and interpreter. By how much is there a sense that the walls may be closing in?
There's a sense of shock inside of this White House because of the double-barreled legal news that happened on Tuesday, still reeling from that in most respects. And the president has become isolated, but he was isolated in many ways over the past few weeks, operating from the executive residence at the White House in the same way he'd operate from Trump Tower. He's been unhappy with Michael Cohen, the person he relied upon to talk to people like David Pecker, to keep him in the tabloids, to handle situations behind the scenes. Now he feels betrayed. He's been named, the candidate's been named by Cohen in court. And so now it's been brought to the presidency. And so many people around him, when you listen to Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, and others, they keep saying they're not talking about pardons in the White House. But that doesn't mean the president's not talking about Manafort and Cohen with people like Giuliani playing golf in Scotland.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.